I'm Sarah Mock, and welcome to Crusonia Conversations, a forum bringing together entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts in ag, food, and health, a group passionate about the fundamental belief that food is health.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Carter Williams, CEO of iSelect. We focus on hard problems. One of those hard problems is Americans spend $1.6 trillion every year on food, but spend nearly $2 trillion on diet-related illnesses like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. Each of these is fatal in their own rights. They're more fatal when you're comorbidities for COVID-19. These are tough problems. At iSelect, we believe if you want any hard problem solved, you give it to an entrepreneur. We believe that you cannot solve the healthcare challenge we face without the evolution to a new, better, and more nutritious food system. Our work at iSelect and the broader work we're doing with Crusonia is focused on bringing the right people together to make this happen, to affect the change, to bring entrepreneurs forward, large corporations, healthcare systems, and patients together to make real progress, to solve the problem associated with healthcare, to introduce better food, to make it so that food and health are combined as a solution to improve our quality of life. Our hope is that results are measured not only through the traditional financial metrics, but through a fundamental and positive impact on reversing the footprint and impact of diet-related illness.
Hello, and welcome to Crusonia Conversations, where entrepreneurs, experts, and investors explore change in the global food system. I'm Sarah Mock, your host for today's discussion. Today, we're talking about the role of the microbiome in shaping health and immunity, with particular applications in the time of COVID-19. Here to help us dig into the links between gut life, overall health, and nutrition is UC Davis professor and chemist Bruce German and Carter Williams, CEO of iSelect. Bruce German joined the faculty of the University of California, Davis in 1988 and is currently director of the Foods for Health Institute. His research interests include the role of milk components in food and health and the application of metabolic assessment to personalizing diet and health with the goal of building and launching knowledge necessary to improve human health through diet. And Carter Williams is CEO of iSelect Fund and founder of Crusonia.org. iSelect is investment with impact, and Carter believes deeply that investment at the nexus of food and health will both contribute to social good and create significant financial growth opportunities. Bruce, I think a helpful place for us all to start is just talk to us a little bit about the research you've done and what you've learned about, how these big topics of the microbiome and gut health tie into the overall health situation.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. We started looking at diet and health from a very specific focus about 20 years ago, using lactation, this remarkable process in mammals where a mother literally dissolves herself to make a complete, comprehensive diet for her infant. And we're trying to understand milk so we can understand how diet can work, not just for mothers and babies, but for all of us. And one of the things that we discovered that caught us completely by surprise was that human breast milk is full of fiber. So this made no sense, right? And it wasn't fiber from the mother's diet. And that's when we realized that evolution had come up with a remarkable strategy that mothers recruit another life form to babysit their babies. And as a result of this combination of the right bacteria and food for this specific bacteria, breastfed babies are full of, in the lower intestine, of a very specific strain of bifidobacteria. So the question is, what does the microbiome do for you? And the studies on breast milk and bifidobacteria taught us that the microbial community in us is very important. It protects us from pathogens. It fuels us. It nourishes us. it educates our immune system, even our metabolism. So clearly, throughout the evolution of higher organisms, we have been surrounded by, in essence, bacteria. We live with bacteria on and in us all the time. And if we get the right ones, life is good. If we get the wrong ones, not so good. And it opens up the possibility for people literally control the microbial community in them. So, of course, protect them from pathogens, organisms like Clostridium difficile, but also to guide your immunity, to suppress inappropriate inflammation, but to support the appropriate response to an infection or a vaccination.
You know, as people become, more sensitive to foods, whether because of an allergy or because of just increased interest in their health, what kind of technologies, or where do you think there's an opportunity for more technology and investors to play a role in helping bridge some of the gaps that might exist in people kind of taking on health in these new ways?
We look at it in terms of right now, in terms of things like RNA and DNA, longitudinal data that would be gathered from Fitbits and Garmin watches and Apple watches. Those are sort of the first step in this direction, and trying to get more span-wise data instead of you going in and getting a blood test with your doctor once a year and trying to determine what's going on by monitoring that data on a more regular basis. And very specifically in terms of our investments, that's been around the areas of imagery data and RNA data, and gathering that and trying to drive more causation. The other part that's going to start to come on, we've looked a lot at assays that test people's biome, and there are various efforts to sort of say these, just like you'd get your genes sequenced from 23andMe, I'll get my biome monitored and make some causation. We're not at a point where we can make those connections, but I was listening to a podcast actually recently. It was fascinating. Ben Greenfeld, who's sort of a biohacker, actually went in and got a continuous blood glucose monitor and monitored himself for a year. And in that process, he found that he would get, for example, a glycemic spike when he ate green beans. He loves green beans, eats them all the time. And that glycemic spike was ultimately related to an allergic response. And he determined ultimately that, unbeknownst to him, he was allergic to green beans. And so now he mediates how he eats green beans, because that allergic response ultimately has a longer term effect on his immune system in various ways. And he's trying to actively manage his CRP down, which for most, and that whole jumble of mess that I just said, most people wouldn't do. But to think that somebody is at that step on the front end, a human being who's not a doctor, is using a continuous blood glucose monitor for something other than diabetes to start to evaluate himself, it automatically becomes clear that in 2 or 3 years, just like we have a watch that now can measure your EKG and can measure pulse rate variability. Pulse rate variability is also can be an indicator of whether you have COVID. That was discovered, that was sort of realized and reduced to practice just recently through the whole COVID scare. It totally makes sense to me to think that we will somehow package up continuous blood glucose monitors to be a small thing that everybody wears, and then starts to get some more information about these correlations.
As a layperson who's learned about the microbiome and who's maybe read some articles and learned about the importance of bacteria, I think the obvious solution seems to be the easy silver bullet is I'll just take a probiotic. Our probiotic, whether it's pills or yogurts or drinks, is that the solution we're looking for? Is like addressing the right issue there?
Probiotics are an interesting case of a field in development early. So gradually we're beginning to realize that we don't have all the bacteria that we'd like, and they're not functioning the way we would like. And so eventually we're going to have to deliver the right bacteria to people. That's a compelling idea. And the first generation of probiotics are aware of that idea. However, it is much more complicated to actually introduce a bacterium into the intestine that will persist and remain as a stable part of that community, growing, dividing, multiplying, and influencing the overall community. That's a very difficult challenge for a bacteria. And the current repertoire of probiotics have been screened for two basic criteria. One, safety. They have to be safe. And one of the most remarkable success stories in food history is the safety of probiotics. They have been proven to be very safe. And industrial stability, so that you can have live viable bacteria in a product. However, those bacteria, though safe and stable in a package, do not contribute significantly to the population of bacteria in your microbiome. So we know where we're going, scientifically and therapeutically. We're going to have to alter the microbial community in and on us. What we don't know yet is exactly how we're going to do that. Unfortunately, we do know that the current generation of probiotics don't do that. But in one sense, that's actually good news, because if you took a living organism and it established itself as a permanent colony in you, and it did anything you didn't want, how are you going to get it out? So there's a double-edged sword to probiotics. We have to develop bacterial ingredients that will alter the microbial community in us, consume complex carbohydrates from our diet, and grow and function as a part of that community and provide us therapeutic advantages. But when we don't want them anymore, they leave. So it's a tall order, but we're getting very close.
My sense is the opportunity in the most immediate term are really to sort of bring us back to nature to some degree on this. I am unsettled on the biome because probiotics, a biome is a wide, complex area. And in as much as somebody finds one instance where one data set maybe overlaps with that probiotic applying to that particular case, has so many different components to it that maybe works. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a little uncomfortable about that. That probiotics is a good first step, but I think that we're going to learn a lot more over the next 5 years in this. I think as we think about immune response is becoming a really important field of study, both for cardiovascular disease. Half of cardiac arrests are related to people that have no known cardiovascular disease other than inflammation. Inflammatory aspects to diabetes, there's clearly a more important thing that's showing up. Its connections to CNS disease like Alzheimer's is becoming more present. And I think that the amount of pressure that's going to come in and around the area of understanding inflammation as a broader topic has always been fascinating from an investment standpoint. We don't have perfect data on it yet, but I think that the present case of COVID is going to cause a lot of PhDs to think harder about, hey, maybe I want to go work in this area. Sort of that period of time where our understanding of inflammation and the immune system is really going to yield a lot of interesting opportunity over the next 15 years.
There's a movement right now happening in the agricultural space around soil health and the importance of paying attention to soil health as part of an agricultural cropping system. But talk to us about how that might translate all the way through the food system into the foods we eat. How directly related is soil health to human nutrition?
The scientific community has been completely changed over the past 10 years because of the advent of mass sequencing. And with that sequencing, we can tell what microorganisms are there as communities. And as we've been able to look into communities, literally from the plants and the soils they grow on, all the way to us and the bacteria in us, we realize it's not, in essence, simple, it's complex communities. When you get them right, things flourish. And so if the soil community is appropriate, then the minerals that are in the soil get taken up better by the plants. And so the plants tend to have a higher nutritional quality. They're healthier plants, they grow better, and they're literally healthier for us. It all relates to understanding a very complex community structure, not possible 10 years ago, very possible today. And that's why you're seeing this explosion in scientific knowledge, all these bacterial communities, and increasingly the application of that knowledge is utility. Healthier foods, healthier people, more delicious foods, more delighted people. It's genuinely all coming together as we understand these microbial communities.
What we have seen certainly in the food system is we've boosted yield. We've really backed yield in things like corn and soy. We've really backed down on the nutritional qualities. What we're seeing from the consumer marketplace is a lot more pressure to increase those nutritional qualities. And so certainly in terms of micronutrients and core nutrition, it is absolutely clear connectivity between how we grow these things and how they end up in our food and what happens. And it's a reasonable, logical connection. Understanding the connectivity between microbiome and soil health and crop nutritional performance is certainly we're well invested in that area and paying a great deal of attention to it.
Is there lessons to be learned from other places that can inform maybe technologies going forward or business opportunities or the science as we move forward in understanding the biome?
The analogy I make, or the things I pay attention to in regards to the biome is one, if we think just back to genetic sequencing, we really started to understand how to do genetic sequencing in the early 70s. As we saw Legionnaire's disease and HIV came online, we started sequencing viruses and understanding them in a greater detail. And that sort of led over time to a wider application of solutions in immunotherapy in sort of the 2005 timeframe. So I sort of see that as a cycle of 1972, 73 to 2005, where we really saw connectivity of how we understood how viruses and immunotherapy interact around cancer. The discovery that that bacteria can affect ulcers that was originally discovered, I believe, in the mid-'80s, but not really recognized as a practice until the mid-'90s, represents a period of time in which the world changed its viewpoint of, is bacteria killed in the gut, to, is bacteria a much more complex system? And along that same kind of footprint, if we sort of think through the years, it'll take 30 years to sort of sort through it. But in the near term, there are specific things that we will discover that as the rest of the world runs around with probiotics and says, take probiotics, that's sort of the first noise that comes up with any new technology. But then very specifically, we have really clear evidence of what's happening with babies and sterile birth and its effect on early childhood immune disease, that we can sort of go early into that market and see that as an opportunity and then learn from it. And then at some point later on, we're going to understand a much better perspective on how biome choices affect somebody over a 20-year period. And we'll have more comprehensive solutions that come down the way.
Carter, great points. And if I look at where we're going with the science and what history can teach us, let's take the essential nutrients, the vitamins. The nutrition community did a wonderful job in identifying these rare molecules and their role in us. The public health translation of that knowledge, magnificent. Put vitamins into foods, made sure we didn't process them out, monitored the entire food supply, magnificent public health success. Commercial disaster. We basically don't pay anything. Iodide protects you from a horrible disfigurement of your throat, a goiter, and catastrophic neurological damage to infants during pregnancy if you don't get enough iodine. How much do you pay for the iodine salt? Nothing. So magnificent public health success, disastrous commercial value creation. So we need to realize that if we're going to invest and capture what's necessary to take the next big step in diet and health, improving the kinds of diseases that diet's causing today, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, allergies, all of the problems that are destroying our quality of life, we're going to have to get the public health right, and we're going to have to get the commercial side right. And you've already alluded to the concept of us measuring our health better. And so you're going to see the proliferation of cottage industries that give us better information about ourselves. So the more we understand the relationship between food and our health, the more we can swing that entire process, not just to less disease, but more performance. And from a commercial perspective, we'll be happy to pay for them.
Now we want to go ahead and turn to the audience for a live Q&A with Bruce and Carter. A few notes on how this session will work. If you have a question for either of our speakers, please write it in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you submit a question to chat, please go ahead and also submit it in the Q&A. That's where we'll be pulling questions from. Our moderator will put you in the queue as soon as you've added your question, and when you're up, I'll recognize you by name. You'll need to unmute your microphone, and we ask that you please introduce yourself and your affiliation. So we will dive right in. It looks like we have a question. We have a question from Horace Nally. Horace, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, I am.
All right, go for it.
What do you gentlemen think is the future for postbiotics?
In fact, if we define postbiotics as the metabolites produced selectively by bacteria under particular growth conditions, and much of the research emerging suggests that they are many of the effectors of the microbiome in us, they constitute the potential to, at least in the early stages, achieve some of the benefits of shifting the entire microbiome by providing, in essence, the metabolite pools that are produced naturally within you by the microbiome. It's very attractive. What we don't yet know is just how critical the concentrations of those postbiotics are, the timing of their delivery, and the location of their delivery. They're unique in that they're delivered to a particular tissue, as it were, in a particular timing. But as a therapeutic option, they look very attractive, and especially for specific therapeutic applications. I think it's going to represent, frankly, a whole new therapeutic opportunity for interventions.
Hey, Bruce, I've got a question for you on that. How do you investigate the correlation?
Yeah, very painstakingly. There are now beginning to be initiatives in which the metabolome of the microbiome is being measured. So we, in essence, capture all of the bacteria within a particular ecosystem, the intestine of healthy and not so healthy individuals, and then capture all of the metabolites that are being produced by those bacteria as a sample. And then you start taking those metabolites and studying them both as individuals and as ensembles for their therapeutic efficacy. So the tools of modern science, genomics, metabolomics, proteomics, are ideally suited to these ecological questions. Absolutely.
Carter, did you have any follow-up on your perspective on postbiotics?
Well, I no, because it's a tough area at this point, and we haven't been really investigating it that much. We've been sort of tracking perspectives like Spruce on it. So,
Absolutely. We have another question. How do you separate human genetics and predispositions to chronic disease, such as type 2 diabetes, from whatever effects, either positive or negative, come from the microbiome?
Sure, I'll jump in on this as well. This is a great question. This is genuinely what the scientific community, the National Institutes of Health, are racing to try and understand. Because complex diseases that take decades to develop in a population and don't afflict a population homogeneously represent the massive challenge that science is facing. In the same environment, some people are lean, mean, fighting machines, and some are overweight and on a trajectory to frank diabetes. And it's a multifactorial problem. One of the things that's helping is the new development of this cottage industry of health measurement. Carter alluded to it, that it used to be that sampling blood and measuring glucose was a painstaking process that you really only undertook if you were a frank diabetic. But now devices are emerging so that you can follow the time course in real time of your blood glucose. And so you can begin to explore in individuals what are the perturbations in their diet, their lifestyle, even their microbiome that have the ability to start bringing glucose control under, in essence, a set of efficacy variables. And we are confident that's what precision health is all about. Precision medicine is already going there. Precision nutrition, that's its next step. And the microbiome is going to be part of that, in part because we now know we can genuinely affect the composition and function of the human microbiome within individuals.
Building on this a bit, when we concentrate a lot on what's going on with diabetes. We've certainly had Bob Lustig talk about that in the past, and certainly in some of his most recent commentary, he's really suggested quite heavily in regards to COVID that dramatic reduction of ultra-processed food makes a lot of sense right now. I think in the concept around the biome, there's some first order things we can do right now that improve health that are obvious. Reduce ultra processed food. The second step or third step down the road will be these tighter correlations to try to understand how does biome interact with other disease states. In many cases, we got to take the noise of obesity out, and then the inclusion in the midterm of a better understanding of biome will help to sort of help further refine and keep people on track. So there's a time series issue of when these things are going to come true. I think that the thing that's going to happen first is really more around the longitudinal data area, in which, and this is an area that we have not, I made an attempt to try to sort of say, hey, can we open up HIPAA? Can we make it easier for people to get this data? Can we deepen the quality of the data around them? It's sort of a public service kind of function that we're thinking about. And maybe after the election's over, we might be able to get back with some of the policymakers and free that up. But I think we got to dramatically increase the depth of data that we have, and that they're both venture business opportunities near term in that realm, and also public opportunities in that realm that I think we all need to sort of contribute to help augment the hardcore data that folks like Bruce are working on to try to correlate in their laboratories.
take the moderator's prerogative here just to ask a brief follow-up. So I'm curious what, from both of your perspectives, so much of nutrition science, has just been changing so quickly to Bruce's point, especially in the last 10 years. Is there any risk that, we're going to learn things in the near term about the biome, build technologies around, addressing or integrating that piece of knowledge, and then find out, 10 years from now that we didn't have it quite right and that we actually were causing harm or something along those lines? I think that's not uncommon in the nutrition space. An example like taking all the fat out of food, which was a trend in the 70s and 80s, and replacing it with sugar. What's kind of your perspective on, what's the risk of moving too quickly?
100%. Bruce?
Well, I would say there's two perspectives on that. One is the situation's actually pretty bad right now, and so there is a true urgency to build an understanding of the relationship between diet and health, because as Carter mentioned, we're basically destroying the value of agriculture as an enterprise with the health that it's destroying. So there's a true urgency to this. What I think has been driving much of the misinformation is actually the vagueness of the information, and we've been pursuing a nutritional model for a century that suggests that we treat everybody as if they were the same, and we were lulled into that sense of confidence by the essential nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that we need. Every single person needs to consume vitamin C. There's no variation. There's not some people who can make it or not. So we had this wonderful ability to reduce diet and health to these single molecules and single actions. And that was wonderful, but we've solved that. The next generation of diet-dependent health conditions aren't that simple. And the problem is some people thrive in an environment that causes other people to have considerable health problems. Those are genetic variations, those are lifestyle variations, age variations. And so as we begin to realize we cannot make these generalized recommendations and have everyone, in essence, benefit the same, precision is an absolute requirement. But that's the way the world has gone anyway. 100 years ago, if you wanted to listen to music, you went to the town square on a Saturday afternoon and listened to a Oompa Oompa band. Today, there are technologies in your device that bring you the music of the world that you specifically prefer. And that's not considered wildly, in essence, technology dependent. It's just the way it works today. So imagine being able to deliver diet and health with that kind of precision. Then we'll be able to see health become something we can control.
When I look back even at the shift away from fat that occurred in the dietary standards in the late 70s, nobody said eat more sugar, but once fat was taken out as a marketing function, it was easier to sell ultra-processed, and it had its own kind of natural addictiveness to it. So the market sort of moved in a different direction, but it wasn't like the nutritionist said, eat more sugar in your reduction of fat. So I think that the core scientists have a pretty good understanding of directionally what is correct, and that things in the marketplace cause some confusion. I think that the venture opportunity is to take these complex subjects and reduce them. I've often thought that even something like cardiovascular disease, that you can go become a cardiologist and it's a lot of effort to be a good cardiologist. It is possible to educate people around the major factors they need to pay attention to and to simplify that. And the analogy I might make is I remember when we first had when we had DVDs and MP3s first came out, it was a complex process of ripping DVD and fiddling with the data, and people started building databases to automatically index them and a whole bunch of things. And now pretty much it's all pretty straightforward. It took 9, 10, 15 years to simplify that. In a similar way, When I look at my HRV data and I measure it, and it's telling me that my total power frequency and low frequency, and those are very, very complex subjects that I can't understand, but it's just going to be a matter of time before an innovator sort of steps forward. And these are the kind of people we're looking for. An innovator steps forward and says, yeah, a complex subject, we can streamline this, put it into an app, make it available on top of Garmin, to make it available to people, to guide them in a more personalized way. That's the type of innovation I think we're going to see in the near term. And what those innovations will do will really normalize people and get people to execute what Bruce already knows is best practice. The error will be people that read some goofy article on I don't know, Google somewhere and decide that they're going to completely change their diet because it works for one person. And really has no relevance to them.
I think we'll come back to that question of personalization versus generalization, but I want to first send it over to Mark Connolly. Mark, are you ready to answer your question?
Sure.
Ask your question, sorry. Go for it.
So Dr. German, you talk about the need to create a sustainable change in the microbiome and that probiotic supplements are not doing that. Given what we know now, how do you think about the current technologies for making those kind of changes? Eliminating green beans from your diet is not that difficult. Adding foods isn't difficult, but supplements don't seem to work. I wonder if this ultimately becomes a pure drug delivery type mechanism, or are there more pieces to that to create that sustainable change rather than just sort of an injection?
Yeah, great question, and that's really what is facing this entire scientific and therapeutic communities. How do we go about influencing the community in ways we want? And actually, our work on human breast milk and what it does for babies is very instructive. So human breast milk contains an impressive array of complex sugar polymers, oligosaccharides. It's like your mother's putting fiber in the milk, and it's not from her diet. It's literally from she's making it. So why does she do that? We originally thought it was to feed bacteria in general, and clearly that was not true. These oligosaccharides are sugars held together with glycosidic bonds. The bacteria needs to be able to cleave those bonds to get the sugars. Bacteria can't cleave them either. But then we found one bacteria, Bifidobacteriolongum subspecies infantis. And this specific bacteria has a repertoire of genes that encode enzymes that release all of those sugars and make it possible to consume those sugars and live on them. As a result, a breastfed infant that acquires this bifidobacteria from its environment, then it's amazing what it does to the microbiome. Over 90% of the bacteria in that breastfed baby is a single strain of bacteria. And that bacteria fuels the baby. It drives out pathogens. It drops inflammation. It provides a wealth of benefits to the baby as long as breastfeeding proceeds. But when breastfeeding ceases, then the advantage to that bacterium of that unique and selective food supply is gone, and now other bacteria begin to populate that community. So we know what's possible from breast milk. The problem is, of course, it took millions of years of evolution to achieve that in breastfed infants. Now science has to consider how should we proceed for the rest of us. How do we get that combination of the right bacteria and its metabolism and the food supply that will encourage that bacteria to be, in essence, an important member of the microbial community? But mothers have given us a really nice path to get there.
So if I could continue, just in essence, what you're saying is that the bacteria that the mother is providing does not, in fact, necessarily sustain beyond the breastfeeding stage, but it sort of sets the stage for what comes next.
And actually, we see considerable evidence that the immune system in infants is educated through the first months of life. And that education is highly sensitive to the microbial community. So you can have, we'll say, two alternatives. You have a baby that's breastfed and has the right bacteria. There's very little endotoxin. There's very little activation of the innate immune system. There's relatively little inflammation even detectable. So that immune system is being educated in what we'll call a very positive environment. Now, a baby that doesn't have those bacteria, they now are gradually being populated with gram-negative enterobacteria, producing endotoxin, causing, in essence, explicit activation of the immune system. And now that immune system is being educated in a very different environment. Many of those educational steps persist lifelong. And if you get them wrong, evidence is increasingly compelling. You get things like allergy, asthma, eczema, and those autoimmune conditions appear to persist through life. So the things you do early in your life have effects, and so the bacteria and that unusual microbiome is critical in those developmental educational steps. The question everybody needs to answer, of course, is, can we fix it? If you get developed inappropriately, can restoration of a more protective microbiome recover your immune system? We don't know.
So, Bruce, just to put a finer point on this, because I'm not sure the audience knows some of this research, the process of a sterile birth that's fairly conventional in birth today, your work has determined may very well be the reason why a kid has a peanut allergy, and that by reconnecting the biome, you can get rid of notionally the peanut allergy or diabetes, childhood diabetes, or is it leukemia? Or there's certain autoimmune diseases that have expanded that your work suggests is closely tied to the fact that we're having more cesarean sections and we're trying to keep the baby clean at birth.
Yeah,
fairly accurate.
Exactly right, Gart. And actually, it's a multiple faceted problem. Throughout human history, in fact, mammalian history, one of the advantages of live birth is it's a bacterial transfer step. And so the mother transfers her bacteria at birth and over those first few hours and days quantitatively. It's an ingenious idea. And with the best of intentions and very successful outcomes in many respects, antibiotics and cesarean sections have saved literally millions of mothers and babies from pathogens. However, that has a consequence. We didn't just eliminate pathogens, we've eliminated, in essence, these commensal beneficial organisms. The great news is you can put them back. The bad news is that has been a medical experiment that our evidence suggests that well over 90% of babies that have been born in the last 3 generations never got the right bacteria. And what the consequences of that are is the explosion of autoimmune diseases, allergies, asthma. And so, again, we've discovered it, we know what went wrong, and we can now put it back.
And is it fair to, again, I'm going to push out here a little bit, when we look at things like higher CRP ratios in people on higher inflammation leading to cardiovascular disease, is it a legitimate inquiry to sort of say that same effect even at birth of making more sterile births may very well relate to increase of cardiovascular disease and things of that sort? Or is that
certainly inflammation has gone up in a population to the best extent that it's been measurable. And inflammation drives a lot of adverse conditions. And virtually all of the chronic and degenerative diseases have a significant inflammatory component. And so, yes, one of the immediate goals of fixing everyone's microbiome is to get the endotoxin out of our gut and drive it out with bacteria that are net protective. How to do that is something that clearly was a goal of or as a result of the selective pressure through Darwinian evolution of lactation. It was vitally important to protect the baby from not only overt pathogens, but from the chronic inflammation that gram-negative bacteria provide. And that's one of the things that breast milk does. And it's really a spectacular idea emerging from evolution. How do you reduce inflammation in your baby? Recruit the right bacteria and feed them. What scientist would have thought of that?
I don't want to. I don't want to bring this conversation to a close, but I feel like we could go on this topic forever, and we have some other folks who need to ask some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Rob DeBella. Rob, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes.
Go for it.
Carter, you recently, a few minutes ago, mentioned the correlation between the reduction of high processed foods and improved nutritional health. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the plant-based meats, and is that an exception to that comment because they're highly processed programs, yet they're growing in trend and in popularity?
Yeah, I should reserve my comment. When I say ultra processed, I really mean higher content of carbohydrates.
Okay.
But that does not. I do wonder in terms of as we think about something like, for example, if you're referring to something like Impossible.
Yes.
The degree to which that is processed. I think that there is one natural pressure that I think will start reducing the number of ingredients on something like Impossible as we look at SPC, soy protein concentrate. And one of our portfolio companies, Benson Hill, is very involved in producing a higher protein soy that when it comes off the field can be processed into a high concentration of protein without requiring a substantial amount of later stage processing. So I think that some of the cost pressures that as Impossible and Beyond try to reduce their cost, you're going to see that some of that processing disappears. Interesting area of research is in terms of venture activity is, can we improve that food science so that we might be able to reduce the amount of ingredients in a product? And my just general intuition is fewer ingredients is better. But very specifically, when I use the term ultra processed perhaps a little too liberally, and I really mean high sugar content, high refined sugar content.
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
And one final point on that, I'm sorry, the sort of issue is, and Bruce is talking about sugars, I think, that are more extracted out of the bowels. When you've got a highly refined sugar, it's really coming out of your duodenum, and just going right into your system and firing up your insulin and everything, and just as a shock to the system.
Thanks for that question, Rob. We have time for a couple more questions. So if you have asked one in the chat and we don't get to it, I'll give you some information on how to join our Slack channel, and we'll continue answering questions there. But next, I want to ask Richard Miller. Richard, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I follow Carter and iSelect, and we're finalizing a business model. And my question is derived from some of the research. One of my advisors, my PhD son, researched in tribal communities breastfeeding up to the age of as high as 8 years old versus Similac and alternative feeding methods to children. We're seeing at each stage of our lives, whether it's in the birthing stage or early childhood to young adults to middle-aged adults to seniors, that the way that commercialization of food has changed our diets and biome. It's disrupting every stage of our lives. And we're wondering if there's a method in the science that allows us to evaluate each stage and develop a nutritional process during those stages that allows a consumer in the medical community to work in concert. And if that evaluation isn't available right yet, is there money available to put into that process so we can begin evaluating one's diet as early as in the mother's womb based on the mother's diet all the way through their development stages?
Bruce, that one's for you.
Okay. Actually, I would love to see you as a visionary and thought leader in the investment and science support community. This is a great vision you have. From the perspective of this life stage approach, in fact, when we look at breastfeeding itself, we see evidence, in essence, in many respects of exactly what you're saying. So breast milk changes literally not just day to day, hour to hour, from the beginning of feeding to the end of a feeding. It's profoundly different throughout the period of lactation. Early milk is supporting especially the immune system of the infant and getting, in essence, the maturation products of the gut and all the things that were, in essence, very naive because it was just born. And then milk gradually changes as the baby itself changes. There's a slight difference between morning milk and evening milk. Babies, in essence, sleep a little bit better. There's a slight difference between the milk that a mother gives to her son versus the milk that a mother gives to her daughter. So mothers who have daughters have slightly different milk. So there's boy milk, girl milk. So as we begin to use the consequences of evolutionary selective pressure on lactation and milk, we start to see not only we should measure people throughout life stages, but what should we measure to see how they're doing? And then for those where we see an early trajectory going in a direction we would not like, we can act early and preemptively to reverse that trajectory before it ever gets to the point where we're seeing overt inappropriate health conditions. And ironically, the best answer we've developed from all of this is when you have a question, go ask Yamada.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because if we analyze the processed foods, and I know, Carter, you've studied this tremendously, and we introduce organic and natural foods, it enhances the immune system, not only in the soil, but also in our humans. So if we can develop a synergy between our growth in plants and growth in animals that we consume, and then interject it into the human life stages, we can enhance the immune system, which has been seen by our advisors beneficial in the breastfeeding stage versus in the United States, weaning them off of even starting breastfeed and putting them on commercialized formulas. So
I want to
get that start early.
Yeah, absolutely right. But I want to emphasize that not all processing is bad. There are some plants and biomaterials that need to be processed in order to make them safe. So it's not processing that's the problem, is inappropriately processing. And we have learned how to process foods to make them almost pure rocket fuel. And humans don't have a lifestyle today that's consistent with having rocket fuel as a food supply. So we have to learn how to process for each person.
Individually.
Yeah.
sugar's not necessarily bad for you, but how you absorb, where you absorb it in your body and how it processes into your body can be a big difference.
Well, on that note, Richard, thank you so much for that question. This has been an enlightening conversation. Thank you both to Carter and Bruce so much, as well as to iSelect Fund. And we want to offer a big thank you to all of our partners in producing Crusonia Conversations. A big thanks to Benson Hill, a partner of the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis, Cushman & Wakefield Commercial Advisors, EY, and United Health. As we wrap up, we just want to remind everyone that Crusonia Conversations are free to attend, but unfortunately not to produce. So please consider donating to the Crusonia Fund. Go to crusoniaonthedelta.org to donate, or click on the donation link in your follow-up email. And please join us for next Crusonia Conversation, which will feature Vonnie Estes, VP of Technology for the Produce Marketing Association. That'll take place on Wednesday, September 16th. You can register at crusoniaonthedelta.org. And if you're looking to revisit today's conversation, or to keep up with Crusonia Conversations going forward, or for folks who didn't hear their questions answered in today's conversation, follow along on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and on our very lively Slack channel. You can go there to kind of keep up with this conversation as it moves forward, both online and offline. It's a very lively group. Until then, links to all of these resources will be available in the follow-up email you receive after this event, and also registration for Crusonia on the Delta Digital Forum on Wednesday, September 30th, broadcasting live from Memphis, is open now. Please be sure to check your inbox for an invitation. Thank you all so much for joining us and sticking with us today. We're looking forward to seeing you again in September. Thanks.